Hi, my friends, and I'm glad I'm getting this email to you just before the end of the year. 2020! What a time. This video will be short today. The email is pretty long, but I suppose one of the things I was going to write about that I didn't end up writing about was how these reflections on fear are connected to a hope that I have for you at Christmas or whatever holiday you're celebrating this winter. And the hope is this. It's that you and we will have the courage to be in our fears together. A friend and I were processing for a few weeks after the election. Every night we were sending a Marco Polo back and forth, talking about different relationships that we're in and how we were navigating having conversations, particularly when we had different beliefs or understandings or outlooks on what the world is and what we should do in it, particularly with regard to politics. And we spent a long time trying to think about how to assess the character of someone, how to look at, what they do and draw conclusions about who they are. And then we were like, well, okay, well, what if it wasn't about what they do? What if it was about how they talk about what they do and describe or sort of give account for why they do what they do? Because, someone could do something differently than me that I could respect, perhaps how they give account of that. But actually, the thing is, most people can't give account or a good account for what they do, because most people aren't really acting, voting, from a really well reasoned and thought through place. And this is for a lot of reasons. I mean, this is part of what democracy is, right? Democracy does not assume that all of its people are highly educated, that they've really had the time to think about the historical situation and the political process and economics or the way that the Constitution conceives of rights. There's so many things that people will not have thought about, of course. But the thing that we do all share when we talk about these things is that we're all afraid. Not of the same things, which is part of the problem, or part of the difficulty of getting to shared thoughts on what we should do. But I really wonder, and I think it's a hopeful line of reasoning, to instead of going home at the holidays and ripping someone a new one or doing a lot of finger pointing, or judging people's character, which I'm not saying character shouldn't be judged. I think that judgment is based on a belief that some things are better than other things, and I think that that's good and that's okay. But I think we've kind of reached a point where we need creative ways of engaging, because that's not working, talking about things like that. This doesn't mean you have to leave your judgments behind or that you have to let go of them and just sort of float into a room. I'm not saying any of that, and I wouldn't do that. But I am saying perhaps there are creative ways that we can engage if we ground ourselves in the vulnerability of being human and the fact that all humans are afraid. And what if we set up conversations where we shared about what we were afraid of and we listened to what other people were afraid of, and then we asked questions about whether or not what we were afraid of is really a threat, or what kind of threat and to whom. And I just wonder if that would be an interesting line of inquiry that would require courage and vulnerability to be open about fears. It also means that you don't have to be a political analyst. It implies that you don't have to know everything. It implies that you might be voting or acting from a place of a certain kind of fear, not a certain kind of certainty about political ideology or whatever, which, let's be honest, most people are walking around absolutely bullshitting political ideology, but it's mostly because, and this isn't wrong, it's mostly because we're afraid of certain things. And certain political parties or people in the world confirm or speak to our fears. And that's what we're using to reason for the most part. And so I just wonder, and I would be really interested to hear if any of you do this, but I would just wonder if there'd be a way to have a conversation that's rooted in the vulnerability of fear and the collective process of discerning what is actually a threat. And if we give people the space to be afraid, I think that goes quite a long way, because usually what we do with political ideology is basically say, like, you're an idiot, you shouldn't be afraid of that. Or that's not a real fear. What I think is right, what I think is the real fear. And again, I'm not saying that some fears aren't more real than others. I actually certainly think that some fears are more real than others. But I wonder, again, if that's a creative way of standing on the power of being human and being limited and not needing to have power over and control someone else, but meet them on the ground of our common fear and our common desire for flourishing, and then figure out actually how we define that. Like, what is really to be feared, and what is really what we would want to strive for. And then we have questions, political questions about how. But if we can establish the humanity of our fear that sits below all of our structures and our processes and our techniques for how we do things, I think we have better ground upon which to relate. Again, especially because most of us aren't working with an extensive knowledge of political theory or history. So we're all sort of grounded in this moment in time, seeing what we can see. So yeah, I'd be really interested. This has gotten much longer than I meant for it to be, but I'd be really interested to hear how those conversations go, if you have them, and also to hear your thoughts on the piece that I wrote below about, once again, fear and hope, darkness and illumination.